All right. I am calling this meeting of the Lawrence Alliance for Education directors to order. This is our November 14th meeting, and I will ask that we begin by standing and reciting the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. So I just want to note that we have a quorum present, Julio Silverio, Patricia Mariano, Ventura Rodriguez, and myself constituting a quorum, and I think we expect to be joined by two other members shortly. With that, I will open the floor for public comment. Mr. Mali.
Humayun Mali, 53 Chester Street. Good evening, honorable members. After the horrible event of September 13, we the citizens are grateful to Honorable Superintendent Paris for her excellent leadership to continue keeping our school in Lawrence open. Coming to the school, it has been the best comfort and joy for our children. We are grateful to Lawrence Teachers Union in these hard times for making a school's best place. Since the children suffered so much, only in the school find some comfort and joy. Thank you, Lawrence Teachers Union. Our city has been through the worst crisis, our children and families suffering, but because your hard work and caring of this administration, our children have hope. We, the citizens, demand of Massachusetts Attorney General Maura Haley to file complaint against Columbia Gas for murder, our child, for destruction and evacuation. We are united as a city to strive and overcome this adversity. While Columbia Gas put our citizens in a camp, our children need to boil water to get ready to come to school. But we are proud that our schools remain open during this worst time of the crisis. We are, as one city, work hard to have the best education for our children, thanks to Honorable Superintendent Paris and wonderful Lawrence Teachers Union. Also, we have a special request for our hard-working custodial union. Custodial workers across Lawrence public schools, they told us that for 9 years they never got any raise. They have to dissolve the union. So we, the citizen, request from Honorable Superintendent to help our custodial. Lawrence always won. Lawrence always unite. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Mali. Mildred Brizuela.
Hi, my name is Mildred, representing the CPAC. Some of the questions the parents have is that on the IP is being provided due to lack of providers, and parents are not being notified of the services the kids are not getting, like OT or speech if they're not having it. The other stuff there also parents are talking about is the translation on the IP meetings are being provided by staff members in the school, not as professional, and they're not being translated correctly, because some dialogues are different than what it is during the IP than it is. There's also seems to be some discrepancy to how parents are treated in the central office.
Excuse me, could you speak up a little bit?
I'll try. There seems to be some discrepancy of how parents are treated at the central office. It seems that parents that are known their rights.
Sorry, Ms. Brizuela, I don't mean to interrupt you. I appreciate you speaking up. I just want to state for the record, if we didn't catch it at the beginning, Ms. Brizuela is an elected member of the CPAC, the Parents Special Education Advisory Council.
Sorry.
Yep.
Want me to
No,
start
you're doing great. Go ahead.
I'm not used to this talking from. That's all right. It's just, like I said, there seems to be some discrepancy as to how the parents are treated at the central office. It seems that parents that know the rights of the rights to the children, they get more benefits than the parents who doesn't have no knowledge at all. They get least services for their children. And another biggest complaint they have is the after school, the activities for special needs, homework for the kids' special needs for the higher function who who it's not, that needs it, that the parents are not able to help them at school. That's all I have for now.
Thank you.
Thank you.
I want to just note that Mayor Dan Rivera is present, and I know he has a very specific item on the agenda as well, and I'm sure we'll hear from him shortly on that. At this time, I want to turn it over to Superintendent Paris for her report.
Two quick things to share today. First, I wanted to share that last month we had a family engagement summit that was well attended by our families and administrators and staff, with a sharing of ideas and best practices on how to engage our families. It was a really well attended, dynamic summit, and we learned quite a bit across the levels on how our families and our teachers and staff members are engaging in really, really good work. And then the other thing that I wanted to report today is that our girls volleyball team brought home so much pride to us. They had an excellent season, brought us to the semifinalists, which is historic, and Mayor Rivera just hosted a quick celebration for them today at City Hall. I don't know if you wanted to add anything, but I have to say, this team is very young, is 4 years young. They have an incredible father-daughter team, and if you meet them and you're in the room with them, the energy is incredible. The girls worked really, really hard. They do us proud. We think the world of them, and in a moment where our city continues to struggle with so many things, we really, really appreciate their hard work, and we're so proud of them.
Yeah, no, I think the superintendent hit it right on the nail on the head in these times of craziness, that to have the Lawrence in the newspapers about something other than Columbia Gas is a welcome event, and that these women their stature is smaller than most of the teams, and that they cannot go out there and beat them. They told me that most of these most of these the women that they play against are like 6 feet tall, and so they have excelled beyond anybody's expectations. And like I told them when we were in high school, we weren't really that good in anything. I know someone had a call from one of my classmates who played volleyball and tell me different, but I think that they're showing us really the spirit of Lawrence under these toughest times. And a lot of the women on the team, they were affected by the gas crisis, so they were doing double duty. So it was great.
Yeah, thank you.
Excellent. For my chair report, I'm going to just make one note, and then we'll segue into my brief presentation on LAE work plan and priorities. I think just speaking to the comments from Ms. Brizuela earlier tonight, and noting that Superintendent Paris has a special education inclusion update on the agenda tonight, I just wanted to note that with the superintendent's permission, I have initiated reconvening the Inclusion Steering Committee, which met routinely last year to help facilitate the scaling of inclusive classrooms in Lawrence Public Schools. It was, by all accounts, a great success. It really just gave staff and school leaders a chance to come together, occasionally with folks from outside who have expertise in special education, but gives them a chance to come together, share best practices, talk about what's working, where the struggles are, and then try to respond accordingly. So I am, with the superintendent's support, reconvening that to meet regularly on a monthly basis. The staff at all the schools have been phenomenal in their response. Mary Lou Bergeron has been incredibly supportive, which I appreciate on that front as well, and appreciate the support of the superintendent. That's it for my chair report, but I am going to segue now into a brief presentation on LAE work plan and priorities, and this is with the notion of introducing a real broad outline that we can then pick up with discussion, substantive discussion and input from board members at the December meeting. Obviously, we've got questions tonight. I'm happy to take them, but I'm just really trying to introduce a broad outline that follows up somewhat on the training we did earlier this year. So if we can start with the priorities. That's my second one.
That's not one at all.
No.
No, there's one called, so I put two on the hard drive. There's one called board priorities and one called budget process. I see budget process. Yep. Yeah, 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 yeah. All right, great. No, I will have this put in the packets. I'm going to show you one piece that we're going to put in the packets going forward, so, but this is real basic and real quick. All right, so just an overview of priorities for the year. So I've got 4 bullet pointed items there. I just want to note something because I do try my best to make sure that we are reflecting the will of this committee and the priorities for this committee. But the first 3 bullet point items, superintendent review, LPS budget, and turnaround plan, are all required by law or regulation required work of this board. These are items we have to take up to fulfill our duty under law. And so when I think about this as our first full year, that's a lot of work in and of itself. We are responsible for conducting a superintendent review. We're responsible for reviewing the LPS budget, and ultimately will require a vote of this board to send that budget to the city council. And then we will hear from the superintendent in January on turnaround plan, and then initiate a process that would ultimately culminate in a vote on turnaround plan. These are all requirements and are things we have to do. So what I have done in the interest of just trying to recognize this is going to take up a lot of our agenda, and when I think about this, where I hope we can arrive at is noting that one turnaround plan would drop off the agenda for next year, which would open up the agenda for a priority that this board would see fit to take on, or 2, that we would get this is going to be sort of our first budget process that we're going to hopefully design and carry out the way we want to see it, but that as we get that down, that would become easier, and again, open more room in year 2 for the board to pursue other priorities. And then same with superintendent review, that we sort of learn the process this year and hopefully then it creates more space for us to take up a lot of the issues that we often discuss here. So just within that context, I've arranged for Desi to present at next month's meeting or in December on superintendent review so that we can all understand what we have to do to have a superintendent review. And so we will receive a presentation on that in December. On budget, I'm going to put some pieces out there tonight very quickly, and then follow it up with a more substantive discussion on budget next month, where I hope you will bring questions and ideas and thoughts. And so then what I'm going to do in conjunction with that is what you see up there on the screen, I'm going to have that put in everybody's binder, and we're going to begin every meeting by reviewing our goals and priorities. And so we'll have, with LPS budget as an example, we'll have our objective up there, and next month what I'd like to do is hammer out what we want that objective to be. For budget, I put up there to establish process for transparent budget review and ensure such process maintains the integrity of the open architecture philosophy. But look, that's what I wrote. We can have a discussion next month to hammer out exactly how we want that objective to read, but then also begin to fill in the timeline on that priority so that we are monitoring at each meeting where we kind of stand on our priorities. We can really go to just the last slide here in this presentation. Okay, and so what I will also do at the beginning of each meeting, and we'll have it in your binders, is we'll have a status update on the priorities, and I've just got a basic red, yellow, green here relative to, where things stand, but you'll be able to then see a timeline, an objective, and a status update on each of the priorities. Now, and I would submit this for discussion next month. I've put 4 priorities here, 3 that are required, and then what I just put as a Lawrence vision for student success. I've talked to a couple of you about this, but this is a discussion that the board has to have, and obviously have it in open meeting, relative to just trying to find ways and have a process to get community feedback around what are our priorities as a board, as a city, as a school system. But that's open for discussion at next month's meeting. This, I just wanted to, in response to what multiple board members have raised, just give you an overview here where we can actually track priorities, objectives, goals, and do it on a meeting-to-meeting basis, and also understanding that, at least for this year, we do have three big pieces of work that are required. That's all I've got on that, but I'm open for any questions anybody may have.
Mr. Chair?
Yep.
So if we had ideas about a priority, should we just get them to you, or those ones that came that were boiled down from our day long?
Yeah, I think what I will do is I will have Joan, just to make sure we're in open meeting compliance, I'll have Joan send out an email following this meeting soliciting ideas for priorities that can go into a discussion at next month's meeting, and we'll narrow them down then. In other words, well, I mean, listen, I would argue that we don't have the bandwidth to get beyond 4 this year, and 3 will be tough. But I do think we should have a discussion if we think there is something missing or something that's got to get up there. I'd like to do that in December and nail it down. Any other?
But this is the framework that we're going to use to work through all of them. It's like an objective sheet, and then a green light, red light sheet.
Provided it meets with everybody's approval. If people want to come back next month and say, I don't want to see any green, yellow, red, then so be it. But I just want to find a very basic way for us to know that we are, we have a determined agenda of priorities, and that we are monitoring how we're doing on that as we move through the year. Okay, great. So with that said, I mentioned that next month we'll get, in December, we will get a briefing on superintendent review. You know, in January, we're going to get a briefing from the superintendent on turnaround plan. I wanted to introduce, again, for a deeper discussion next month, LPS budget tonight, and that would be my second slide deck, which is very quick. Okay, so on budget process, I think I look at three pieces around this that we have to do. So for starters, and we can get, thank you, details on this next meeting, but superintendent and her team are already beginning basic work around preparing a budget. I don't think, I mean, we have a budget expert on this board in Mayor Rivera, and a Lawrence budget expert in Mayor Rivera, and I dare I say too, we have a former city councilor in Julia and a current school committee member in Pat. So I know you guys know your Lawrence budget process like the back of your hand. But it's in the lead up to that point where a budget goes over to city council that we have the flexibility to design how we want to review this budget, working with the superintendent. And that is not a process that has been designed or determined yet. And I'm just trying to introduce these ideas for discussion next month. And so I put three goals out there. So one is to establish budget guidelines with the superintendent. These would be those big overarching priorities that will help guide the superintendent and her team in developing that budget. I think when we think about a budget process, we want to make sure that we fully understand the district's overall budgeting strategy and reporting mechanisms, how they're putting that budget together in line, with guidelines. And then lastly, just to know that this whole process is transparent and that the board has a good understanding of that budget when we go to vote on it. So those are just pretty overarching goals. And again, I think, people could come up with more details and more priorities on that when we talk next month. So I just quickly want to talk about open architecture as it relates to the budget, because we know that open architecture is what the system that has been put in place. And I don't presuppose that all of it is great. I think, some of it works, some of it doesn't. These are things that we're going to want to discuss, but just through the lens of recognizing that open architecture is the way the district has been operating. I just note that has very direct links to how you budget. Again, you'll get this deck, but the whole idea behind budgeting and open architecture was that you had a streamlined central office that's designed to serve the schools, and that the schools are having, large degrees of freedom around budgeting, shifting resources to the school level, unlike the way many traditional districts operate, where it's sort of top-down. This was a sort of bottom-up, grassroots budgeting approach. So just want to talk about one of the other notions of this is that when, I think one of the pros on open architecture, and again, I would recognize that, I'm sure, and I think the superintendent can speak to it, there are aspects of open architecture that may not be working or may need fixing or are coming up short, but one of the pro sides, I think, is just that it is, in its essence, student-centered budgeting. It's about putting the money and the discretion at the school site level where hopefully decisions are being made that are most directly impacting and helping kids. So again, just trying to give a very broad overview. I pulled this from one of the sort of organizations that does work with school districts on budgeting, but just this notion again behind transparent budgeting, which is, again, I asked the board, next meeting, you tell me how you think we could best do the budget process. I think the Lawrence residents will have the best idea on that. What I care about is at the core, I think what you also care about, that it's transparent. Because we know when it's transparent, that it's going to be accountable on how the public funds are getting used. It upholds the integrity of the process. It's more inclusive when it's transparent because everybody has a say and everybody understands where the dollars are going. This is the stuff that I think matters most to the community, to the board, to the superintendent, and we just want to make sure that happens. So this is my last slide. The city councilor in me did not like this slide, but thankfully I've had the city councilor exorcised from my being. But it goes to all these things that transparent budgeting is. I think the superintendent will like this slide, but transparent budgeting is not a methodology for what you do with the funds. That's the superintendent's domain. We set guidelines in the broad sense, we review, and we ensure transparency, but the detailed decision-making there is done by the superintendent and presented to us. But that is not us determining allocations and whatnot. Can I get a small smile, Superintendent? Thank you. Okay. That's all I have on that. Any questions around this? But again, I'm introducing this tonight with the idea that this is one of our key priorities, and we've got to have a discussion around how we want to run this process. And I'm trying to get us ahead of the curve because we know the superintendent's budget won't be, we can get our guidelines as while they're preparing the budget. I think that would be best for everybody. But then we know we're not going to see that budget until February, March?
Spring.
Yeah, spring. So I'm trying to get us ahead of the curve so that we can say to LPS, this is the process we're hoping to have. And we don't want you to feel like you're hearing about it in March. We want you to know about it in December so you can be ready and understand the questions we want to ask and how we want to do it. So I'm throwing that out there for you to think about. We can have more substantive discussion next month. But if there's any comments or questions right now, I'd welcome them. Julio.
Mr. Chair, I just have a question. Since we're going to be discussing this next month, is it possible for us to get a copy of the budget that was presented to the city council prior to that meeting so that we can take a look at it? That way, if we have questions when it is presented, we would have a better idea of what the budget looks like.
Absolutely.
Thank you.
And again, I will circle with Joan and have Joan reach out on all of these items so that people can send feedback in compliance with open meeting, and we'll then devise the agenda for next month from there. Any other comments or anything on that front? Great. Okay, so at this time, I'm going to turn it over to the mayor relative to the item on Northern Essex Community College Scholarship Fund. And I do just want to note that we're joined by President Glenn tonight. And we appreciate him being here.
Thank you so much, Mr. Chair. The item we have before you is an interesting opportunity that we have as a community. As you know, the Northern Essex Community College is our community college that most of our students attend when they chose to go to a community college, us in Middlesex Community College. And the role that President Glenn and his staff have played in general economic development in our city, education attainment in our cities, his role at the Workforce Investment Board. I oftentimes kid him that I'm not sure when he finds time to run the college, but he has great staff. I'm sure that they're doing it every day. He came to me with an idea that I think we should invest in, that it's a long-term support for students of our city, not only in getting to the college and affording the college, but also being able to navigate through it. So I was hoping he can stand up and give us a couple words on what I think he's calling the Lawrence Promise. And I think I got a proposition for the board, and I think that we'll make the decision on supporting or not supporting this very easy.
Sure, happy to do that. So Lane Glen, 420 Common Street here in Lawrence. Nice to see all of you. Thanks for a few minutes this evening. So the Lawrence Promise Program, as the mayor was beginning to describe it, is actually part of a larger major gifts campaign that the college is working on right now. This particular piece of it is meant to be an endowment for student scholarships, specifically for early college students. So right now, Lawrence has one of, if not the largest population of early college students in the state of Massachusetts. Thanks to a Smith Family Foundation grant between Northern Essex Community College and Merrimack College, it's up to 200 students a year in early college classes. This is where the high school students achieve college credit working with college professors while they're still in high school. The good news is that for the last few years, as you know, retention rate, graduation rate, college going rate of Lawrence Public School kids has all been going up. The challenging news for all of us is that the outcomes at the other end, college attainment, has not yet been going up. That's not unique to Lawrence, it's all over the place. About 11% of the adults in the city have a college degree. We want to change that. Oftentimes, kids don't drop out of college because they don't get the math, it's because they don't have the money, right? It's transportation, it's childcare, it's expenses. We want to minimize that problem or get rid of it entirely. Interestingly enough, we did some research that we hadn't done before. We wanted to find out what is the average out-of-pocket cost for a kid in Lawrence to complete an associate's degree at Northern Essex Community College. Tuition, fees, books, and a laptop, because you got to have one of those, right? Most of the students in Lawrence are eligible for full financial aid, a full Pell Grant. That's worth about $6,000 a year. On top of that, most students, when they apply for financial aid, are eligible for state aid, which can add a couple $1,000s more. We're not a terribly expensive college in the first place. What we discovered was that entire associate's degree, the average out-of-pocket cost in Lawrence is only about $1,400. Not a whole lot of money. $1 million endowment at about 4.5% a year. Some years are better, some years are worse. 45 grand. That's 50 kids a year, fully paid for. I'm already out there raising money for this thing. And it helps to be able to say that the community we're raising money for has got some skin in that game. This is a permanent fund that, as of today anyway, would fully fund associate degrees for every single kid graduating from the early college program. There aren't 50 of them yet, right? And by the way, we're going to keep raising money. So the first goal is $1 million. And if this thing works for us and more kids want to get into the early college program, which we hope they will, we're going to keep raising money. So the good thing about this is it will not rely on temporary grant funds, on the vagaries of state funding. It will be a permanent source of funding associate degrees for Lawrence High School students going forward. And hopefully that will incentivize them to go on to bachelor's degrees and make those that much cheaper. So glad to answer any questions. I do have a 2-page document here that I can share with each of you if you'd like to see that. Yeah, happy to do that.
So the interesting thing about this, I feel like, is the number's so low, the investment is so small, but the bang is so big in that, tuition fees and a laptop for all the kids that are already early college students, they're picking these programs for themselves, so these kids are going to be looking to go to Northern Essex Community College. And for me, the most important thing is that it's this endowment, $1 million. It's just for the Lawrence kids.
Yeah, it's just for the Lawrence kids.
Just for the Lawrence kids.
That's right.
Can you talk a little bit more about where you guys are at with the rest of the fundraising?
Sure. So we have at least 2 6-figure contributions in hand toward this specific fund. We've got a couple of 5-figure contributions in hand, and we haven't really gone public with this yet. Well, I guess now I am, right? Here we are. Hi, everyone. We haven't gone intentionally public with this yet. We'll be having a couple of public events coming up, but what we wanted to do was raise at least half of it before we did that. I'm hopeful that this board can help us get there tonight, if not soon after.
Yeah, so the proposition I have for the board is I know that we have, because we've been looking through all the financials for all of the citywide stuff, and we do have, this year will be the first year in a very long time that we have a $15 million free cash number. It's actually $15 million too. And so we know we have reserved dollars for this. We know that we're actually going to, my intention in the in the summer is to put out a budget that doesn't raise taxes. It's a zero tax increase. That's my expectation. And we have the possibility, and we know we have to meet net school spending dollars. There are accounts that have funding for these things in the current school budget. Frankly, accounts that haven't been touched, and that to some extent work off just the interest of that money. And so what I'm proposition for the board is, in the next budget cycle, if this board will vote to allow the superintendent to get into into agreement with Northern Laces Community College to add $100,000 to the $1 million fund, and so that he can go out and raise the rest of it, that the city will make the school department, the school budget whole on that $100,000 from either the free cash dollars or from through the budget process. That's my intent. So I'll do that as a form of a motion.
Do we want that listed as a motion to recommend that the superintendent, or?
A motion to allow the superintendent
Great. All right,
to
so,
enter to the agreement. And I'm hoping we'll have some more discussion about it, but that's the gist of it. I do believe the skin in the game is important, and specifically since we do have it, and I think that we're going to be okay financially to pay for it.
great. So we have a motion on the floor, but I'd open this for any questions or comments from any members.
Dan, could you just restate the exact motion?
So the motion is because I can't, it's funny, I have to sign the checks, but I can't spend the money. The superintendent has to spend the money. To allow the superintendent to get into an agreement with Northern Laces Community College to the tune of $100,000 to support the Lawrence Promise project, and that the school department's budget will be made whole by the city side, either through free cash or through the budget process.
I'll second for discussion.
Great. Questions or comments from members?
Question, if the city, if there is enough free cash in the school department, why would the city need to to pay back that money, or instead of having the school department and the city contribute both $100,000 towards the fund?
I like where your head's at. I was being a good steward of, I was just trying to make it the easiest path, though. So I'd be glad not to make the school department whole again, and I actually would put a motion like this before the city council to see if they would do $100,000 as well. I mean, that would be $200,000. We do have it. There's $500,000 that's been sitting in a college fund on the school side that they maybe take out $1,000, $2,000 a year. They're not taking 100. It's basically the interest that they run off of it, and that by the time the money gets replaced, the interest would be. I just want to make sure that I wasn't throwing the interest off of what they were getting. Although I'm not sure they're getting that, it would really hurt them that much. In the sense, I didn't want to upset the apple cart. I wanted to make everybody whole, but I think it's a good thing to do. And my intention was to do this. And if I can get the $100,000 from here, then I was going to try to get the city council to pitch another $100,000 as well. But with your support, it would make it easier.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I think if we're truly trying to make the children of Lawrence succeed at the educational level, it's the responsibility not only of the school department but also of the city. And that's why my recommendation, if you're going to pay back, why not just, like I said, be able to provide the $200,000 rather than $100,000, have the other department look to the city for the additional $100,000.
I'll do that. If you do that as a friendly amendment, I'll take that. I'll do that.
So moved.
So the motion is to allow the superintendent into the agreement, and that also, in lieu of matching that the city take the dollars and add it also to the fund.
Correct.
So I think it's a great idea. I think the city and the school department should clearly be investing in, our kids' education, college education. I just have a question. I just want to understand the fund that this would come out of at the school department. Is that currently being underutilized for scholarships for kids? And if so, why? And if not, am I not understanding how it's working?
I know Christine's, Befugnis in the audience, and the superintendent can also talk about this, but all that we could find, talking to our budget side, the line item is $500,000 there, but that the interest they've been using money from the interest to pay some of these things out. So it's not being underutilized, it's just that.
Okay, so they're just using it like an endowment already?
Exactly.
So we would be taking $100,000 of principal from that endowment?
Correct.
And utilize it? Yeah.
Christine can run us
Okay.
through how that works.
So just to clarify, there is an endowment account held at the city. It was gifts given to establish scholarship accounts. And what happens every year is the interest that is generated is given out in scholarships.
Okay.
So I think the proposal is to use some of the principal, if I understand that correctly.
Versus what we currently do.
Right.
And then the balance would still be used to generate interest for other scholarships, not necessarily to Northern Essex, but to anywhere for
Exactly.
students. Okay,
Exactly.
all right.
But I think the proposal is to replenish the principal. Is that the proposal?
That was the original proposal.
That was the original proposal.
Yeah.
Julia is proposing not to do that, but to use the $100,000 that we would use, that the city would use to replenish the principal and donate that as well to this fund at Northern Essex.
That would just decrease the amount of scholarships that would be given out from this account.
But it would increase the amount that will be provided through the other fund, through the Northern Essex Promise program.
Right.
So it would still be used for the same purpose.
Well, the current scholarships, the children attend multiple colleges and universities. There's no restrictions to where they can go.
But just to be clear, I think that there is the college fund that the Alumni Association deals with, and then there's this 500,000 separate.
There is an alumni association that's separate from the school department. They do fundraising, they generate, and they do that on their own, and they have a ceremony every year, and they give scholarships.
Yeah.
Right.
All right.
Okay.
Do we know roughly how much we give out in terms of scholarships?
It depends on the economy. Some years we used to give out $20,000 in interest. Now it's $3,000 or $4,000. It's whatever the interest rates are running.
Christine, what's the principal on that account?
About $500,000.
So could we ask, Lane, can I ask you a question? If this money goes into the Promise Fund, is that what you're calling it?
Yes.
That you're raising, what do you think the leverage is going to be? Like, is this the first $100,000 in? And if so, do you have a timeline or a goal around the other 900,000 that you want to raise, or how is that working?
At this point, it's no longer the first 100,000 in.
Okay.
I will say that. We're not ready to announce some of the other pieces of this yet, but this would put it across the halfway point.
Okay.
This would put us across the $500,000, which we're anticipating making announcements around in a couple of weeks. The ability to say that the city is invested in this is quite valuable.
Yep.
To family foundations, to corporations, to individual donors. We're planning 2 public events, one in December, one in January, at which we expect dozens of people to be there, mostly with the capability of providing some significant contributions. And I think it'll mean a lot to them to know that the city is invested this way.
Can I ask one other question? I'm sorry, is it Christine? Yeah, okay, great. Can you tell us, So if you're giving out at this point $3,000 or $4,000 a year because of the economy and interest rates, are any of those scholarships right now going to students who are attending Northern Essex, or are they just going to a bunch of students? And how many are you giving out? How much to each student? Just
Again, it depends on the amount of money generated every year, but it's given out based on grades, based on athletics, based on basically the endowment about how the money was raised. To give to students who are going to go to a particular college. There's all different categories. The high school could probably address that.
Right. I guess what I'm trying to get at, this is how my brain is turning. It's like, let's say if you're giving out, are you giving out $400 or $500 a student, or are you giving out
Yes.
Okay, so it's like that. So if we did this, we're effectively probably getting rid of one scholarship per student.
Actually,
One scholarship from that account, and we're potentially gaining dozens of scholarships, albeit just focused on Northern Essex. So I'm just parsing out the calculation. Okay, thank you.
And again, I'm still not, I think when we looked at it when we looked at the accounts, the activity, it wasn't just like anecdotal. When we looked at the accounts, the activity was very low.
Yep.
I'm going to try to pull it up here because we run the Munis reports on the ins and out of the account. What I saw was there wasn't that much activity in it, and that's why I said, well, even if the loads, I didn't want to impact it negatively, maybe we'll just reimburse it. But I think there's a way to make it whole and make sure that we're not losing out on any scholarships on this. But I'll look for this while we guys talk.
I mentioned a piece of information that you might find helpful. It's not in direct response to your question, and Lawrence High School staff would know the answer to that best. But if you look on your DESE reports online, you're going to find one stat that jumps out about Lawrence High School, which distinguishes it, I think, from every other high school in the state. About 75% of the graduates who go to college from Lawrence High School attend a community college. And most of them, it's Northern Essex, some of them, it's Middlesex. That is far, far high. It's in a league of its own. There's not another comparable school in the state. Honestly, that might be good and challenging, right? Most of the other schools, it's 5 to 20%, something like that, but a majority of your kids are going directly to a community college. We want to help them get from us to four-year colleges, too.
I would just like to get some feedback from members here relative to, I think this is a great proposal. I can certainly support it. We appreciate the great partnership with Northern Essex and President Glenn's leadership and the difference it makes for Lawrence students. But I'm troubled by the amendment in that we're going to then draw down reduced principal, which in the long run could reduce interest, which could restrict LPS's ability to give scholarships in the future. And I would prefer that we had full knowledge of all accounts and a look at everything if we're going to entertain an amendment that was not going to be conditioned with a replenishment understanding. I think the logic makes perfect sense, and the notion of getting $200,000 from the city for this great program makes sense, but I can't vote for that if I haven't had a chance to look at all the accounts and whatnot. I can vote for one where we know it's going to be replenished because it basically sets LPS back whole again and would be in keeping with all the projections relative to interest. That's going to continue the flexibility to give scholarships to a variety of places. So I would like that to be taken into consideration and welcome feedback from my colleagues.
Mr. Chair?
Yep.
I understand your concern, especially because this was something that was just brought up, but I feel that, especially after the explanation with Jess' questions to Christine about how many scholarships are given out every year, and we're saying, what did she say, 4, something like that, and we would be gaining, the ability of providing more scholarships for more students. So I think it's a good investment for the money. The other thing is, and we haven't discussed the budgetary process for the school department, but there is also the possibility, I think, that this endowment that the school has could probably be incorporated with another community foundation, or even the same Northern Essex, where the monies can be put together and gain more interest for both accounts, knowing that that portion of the money belongs to the school department. But there is a good chance that money can grow faster by combining it with other community organizations that have typical endowments.
I'd just prefer to have that, I would assume you're correct. I prefer to have that documented and backed up before we voted on that piece. Ventura.
If I could just say, Chair, I agree with the comment. I appreciate first of all, appreciate the presentation, and I think anything that could give our kids access to higher education, especially at what I'm understanding is the goal of this at no cost, to make up the difference between, out of pocket and ideally no cost. I guess, one thing I'm hearing, and I just want to kind of check my understanding with the board. I know we can't ask the president directly this, but I'm hearing for a commitment from the city of Lawrence to show that we have skin in the game. We're essentially proposing through the mayor the town paying 10% of this 1 million goal. I'm not hearing a need for more. And I just want to pause on there, because if there were a request for more, I think we'd have to absolutely entertain that. But I'm not hearing, either directly or inferring, that the president is anticipating challenges in raising the rest of the money. Again, I'm just saying I'm not hearing that. So while I completely understand and support the sentiment of, we want to do whatever we can to support our kids, it feels like the ask of 10% is pretty significant. And I'd say, for now, especially if it means keeping the school department budget whole, and through the mayor's proposal, it seems like we'd be able to contribute 10%, which I think is a good contribution. And I'd say if there was a barrier in the future of, can we get the full resources to support this goal of zero out-of-pocket costs, and I'd say we consider it. But with the amendment, that I'd love to then look at some of the figures and look at the impact of, taking $100,000 out of a $500,000, endowment, and sort of projecting that out over the years, and just a little more information. So I guess that's what I'd say there. I'll be able to respond. I have a few other points.
Let me just say something. The reason why I made the amendment is because the mayor, when he made his presentation, said that they're using free cash. So if there is free cash, why not put it into education for our kids, rather than coming up with other things that might happen in the city and the money goes to those things that are not as important? That's the reason why I made that amendment.
And I just want to share, so one of the things that we've tried to do in our administration is to, not be always looking for a way for others to pay our way. And so I think it's important for the city to, when we can, and it's not often that we can, to make the contributions that we can do. And I think it does say a lot to other donors that we would be willing to do $100,000. I think it would say a lot more to them if we were trying to do $200,000. And trust me, I'm in these rooms with these conversations where people are like, well, we know we have to give a lot to Lawrence, and it's not like always a good thing that they want to do. But we know that it's important because it goes to the best needs. So I was excited to hear what my fellow member made that proposal, and I was fast to take up on it, because I think, again, we do have $15.2 million sitting in the reserve fund that we're going to hit up to make our basketball courts better, to fix a ton of different things across the city, and that in the long and short of it, tuition and fees and a laptop for kids that are already, these are kids are already in a program saying that they want to go to get college credits now and lining them up to get the class. So I was in it for the $100,000 because I think it gets us halfway, gets us out the door and lets people know that we're invested. I just think that, again, we can get there on both sides. I think what you're going to find out, anecdotally from what I remember, I can't get my iPad to work, that the activity on the account you're going to find out is really not as high. We aren't really going to miss out on that many scholarships, if any at all, and that there's a way to in the focus to refocus the department on teaching and learning and facilities, which I think they've done a great job. I think some of this stuff has gone by the wayside and hasn't gotten the attention it's supposed to get. And I think that the money sits there because people are so focused on so many other more basic things. So I just wanted to say that.
But now I'm just confused, because if the reason that the $100,000 has to come out of the scholarship fund and then the city has to reimburse it, if the city doesn't reimburse it, right, and gives directly, what's stopping the city from giving $200,000 directly in the first place out of free cash?
Because we could do that.
Yeah.
But the process of starting here for the $100,000, because we have that specific account ready to go on it, and we can get this to them sooner. The other, it's a long, was.
Okay, well then, what if we, like, could the city?
I'm trying to get Lane $100,000 today.
Yeah, right, I gotcha.
So he can get.
No, and I think we should make the contribution. I absolutely think we should make the contribution, and the leverage is awesome. The thing that I don't want to do is reduce resources for college options beyond Northern Essex, which, as fabulous as I think Northern Essex is, I also think there should be these other options for kids. So maybe what should happen is that the city we can make the contribution of $100,000 from our scholarship fund. The city can make that whole so that we have still these other options, and then they could give another $100,000 down the line when you can get that free from free cash. I'm sorry, I'm making your life more expensive.
No, I think I think that's fine. I think at the end of the day, as long as we could do that, and get them first the $100,000 out the door soon, and then to do the second $100,000, in a different setting is fine. I think that would be okay.
And again, Chair, if I could just say, I mean, I appreciate that better, because I think my concern is without having the numbers in front of me of what it means to take out 20%, essentially, of a $500,000 endowment and not being able to, like, see the financial impact of that. I think that's where my concern was. And I think my comment around we're being asked for 10%, which is significant, is because, again, that seemed to be the ask, in terms of what we could do. So this arrangement makes sense to me. I guess I just want to make sure also that we would get clarity, maybe from our legal staff, just around this notion of how the funding, because I don't know if we could donate technically, so we'd have to, like, I need to better understand that.
We did some research on that.
Okay, great.
And our CFO on our side, as well as the staff at that's why it's to enter into an agreement. And basically, we would be paying $100,000 as a vendor. And so the service they would be providing would be the scholarships to the kids.
Got it, okay. And then, sorry, just one more point. I think, obviously, this partnership.
I said that right? Go on.
So yeah, we can take a look at that, and I'd love to look at that. And obviously this partnership is unique because of the very, specific benefit that it gives Lawrence Public School students. So not questioning that at all. However, I guess just wondering if we are approached by another institution, who's doing something similar, I just want to make sure we're noting this, just because it does set a precedent. I think a good one, in that we're putting some skin in the game to support higher education for Lawrence Public School kids. So absolutely agree with it. But I guess just want to make sure we're entering that with eyes open in that regard, that if there's another institution that our kids access and want to access, and there's a similar opportunity, that we'd have to be prepared to at least entertain that.
I guess one thing I would add, sorry, Pat had her hand
No,
up.
that's okay, Jess. What I want to say is, now that we have some clarity to it, I agree with the city reimbursing the endowment fund. I just hated to see kids shut out from different other institutions that, other than, if they want to go to UMass Lowell or other places, I want that scholarship to be available to them also. But on the flip side, I think this is a wonderful opportunity for our kids that do attend Northern Essex, and I want to thank you for proposing that. So I would go along with, giving the $100,000 and having the city put that money back into the endowment fund.
So can I
Wanna re-
read a, Mr. Mayor, if I'm sorry if you want to.
I was just gonna say, parliamentary speaking, I think if Member Silverio would like to withdraw her amendment, I'll accept the withdrawal amendment, and we can just go with the original. That's okay.
Yes, I agree. But before I do that, Mr. Mayor, I just want to say that it is addressing Ventura's concern about other institutions that might come up, which could happen, yes. I agree with you, that could happen, but it isn't very often that we have free cash that we can say we're going to put it towards education. And having been in Lawrence and working both at the city council level and knowing how the school operates, most of the people in the city don't even know that the school department has a fund to assist them with scholarships. And if they're only offering 4 scholarships a year, or 4 or 6, when they could be doing more, I have concerns with that. So this is why I made my motion. So, but I'm happy to withdraw it as long as Jess is willing to make her motion, or the mayor to accept it.
Yeah,
The original
if I-
motion.
Original motion.
If I could, then with the amendment withdrawn, I just want to ask the mayor if I have his motion correctly down, and I'm very much thinking of making sure this is accurate in the minutes. The mayor has put a motion on the floor to allow the superintendent to enter into an agreement to contribute $100,000 from Lawrence Public Schools to the Lawrence Promise Project, which contribution shall be reimbursed by the city of Lawrence to the Lawrence Public Schools. Is that a?
Yeah, I think you have to not call City of Lawrence and Lawrence Public Schools. I think we say from that the Lawrence Public School, that the Lawrence Public Schools Department will be reimbursed from the general fund.
Okay.
Because if you say Lawrence Public
Yeah,
Schools and the
I
City of
understand.
Lawrence, it's like they're 2 different entities, and they're really not.
Which contribution shall be reimbursed to the Lawrence Public School Department from
The general fund,
the City of Lawrence General Fund, or just the general fund?
the general fund.
General fund.
And if any other institution approaches us, they also have to offer 10-to-1 leverage in return on our investment.
Okay, so we have a motion on the floor to allow the superintendent to enter into an agreement to contribute $100,000 from Lawrence Public Schools to the Lawrence Promise Project, which contribution shall be reimbursed to the Lawrence Public School Department from the general fund. Do I have a second? Sorry, Lawrence Promise Program.
Yes, I will second that.
Motion is second. All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye. All those opposed? The motion passes.
Well,
Thank you.
Thank you, Len.
I want to thank you, everyone, for that, and I think it well on its way. I think next meeting, I'll bring some paperwork around the fund so people have a little bit more information on the school department's fund, so people have a little bit more information.
I just also want to say that one of the responsibilities of a nonprofit board is fundraising, and we could try and get even more money into that scholarship fund as a board from private sources as well. So that's just something we should consider and talk about.
Mr. Chair, I don't remember the last time there was a citywide event where people bought tickets to a table, or an event where there was some type of fundraising done specifically for the Lawrence Public Schools. I don't remember the last time that happened.
Yeah, me neither.
And I'd be willing to commit other political figures into the support of this, as well as myself.
I think that would be an awesome idea.
Great.
Mr. Chair, I'd just like for the record to state that while the city is going to reimburse the school department, the mayor is going to look into the possibilities of the city donating the additional $100,000.
For the record,
That is noted on the record, and that was spoken to
She
by
hasn't stopped writing since you stopped.
members Silverio and Anders, who so strongly advocated for that while I, the chair, remained silent. I would like that on the record.
Thank you, Chair. We appreciate that.
Thank you for your indulgence on this matter.
President Glenn, thank you, and thank you for everything you do for children and families in Lawrence. Appreciate it.
Thank you.
All right, with that said, I'm going to turn the next two items on the agenda over to the superintendent and just let her run the meeting relative to these two items.
Yeah, next we're going to have our Assistant Superintendent, Mary Lou Bergeron, and her team, and while they get set up, queued up, you guys can all come up. Big team effort here. She'll introduce the rest of the team, but our Assistant Superintendent, Mary Lou Bergeron, and as you know, former interim Superintendent Bergeron, will be doing an update on inclusion. So this presentation is in your packets. You have it right in front of you. So you're welcome to start joining us with that presentation. You'll see it also up on the board as they're getting set up.
Good evening. We're happy to be here today to talk about special education, and I want to introduce the team that actually runs day-to-day operations and make sure things happen for students. Wanda Rivera-Rosado is our interim special education director. Mr. James Parker is new to the department. He is the assistant director for grades 7 through 12, ensuring the transitions into high school and out of high school to adult services or post-secondary. And Marianelli Horton is our office manager, and she does all of our data and translation service and making sure the interpreters are assigned as needed. So we work as a team on everything we do. But I guess I'm the spokesperson because they're a little shy, so they're going to be here to answer questions. So in your packet, I did make a couple of typo errors, so I fixed them. You may have found them along the way, and I moved one slide into a different spot, so you'll see it when I do it on the screen. I first wanted to start by going over very quickly what is special education. Okay, Dave. Dave?
Far away.
No, there you go, there you go.
Maybe too far away. So special education is really specially designed instruction to meet unique needs of eligible students and/or the related services they need to access general make progress in general curriculum. So a lot of people think special education is additional help. That's really Title I or remediation. Special education is truly specialized instruction. And also to be eligible, a student must meet 3 criteria, and they have to meet all 3. So the student has to have 1 or more disabilities. The student is not making effective progress in school as a result of that disability, and the student requires specialized in curriculum or instruction in order to make effective progress. And
Nice special effects on the PowerPoint there.
If I was doing it, it would be I'd be talking at the same pace. There are now 9 categories of disabilities. There used to be 11, but they've condensed sensory impairment to include what used to be deaf and hard of hearing, deaf, blind, or visual impairments. So those are the key areas in which a child would be diagnosed with a disability. Under the IDEIA's principles, a lot of people know it as IDEA, but in 2004 they actually changed the act, and it's the Individuals with Disability Education Improvement Act at this time. And the big principles are around student and parent participation in the process. So parents have rights to be access and be in all of the conversations, be at team meetings. Students have the ability to participate in the team meeting and give input into the services, in the delivery of services. Free appropriate public education is really what the criteria is to provide those services to students. Appropriate evaluation means that we're looking at the types of evaluations a child needs based on what the referral question is that comes to us, and that we're evaluating those areas and using the appropriate tools. Individualized education program, when a child's found eligible for services, each plan is written for the individual needs of that child. So it's not a one-size-fits-all, and it's not everybody gets everything the same way. It depends on the need. Least restrictive environment means that the goal is that child should stay within the general education program as much as possible given their disability, so that they're getting access to all other services that are available. And we only take them out of that program when they require it because of their disability. And then the last piece is around procedural safeguards. And procedural safeguards means that there are requirements for notice, requirements for consent, requirements for parents being able to appeal or make decisions or bring their concerns to the state, to the Board of Bureau of Appeals if they don't agree with what we've presented and we can't come to a resolution. So we talked a little bit of least restrictive environment means that to the maximum extent appropriate, that students with disabilities are educated with their general education peers in the school that they would have attended. That's kind of the gist of why we move towards inclusion. The student cannot be removed from the general ed curriculum just because they need curriculum modifications, because that is within the scope of the general education classroom. And the removal from this general ed program only if the nature and the severity of the disability makes it such that they cannot progress successfully in that classroom along with the supplemental aids that could be provided within that room. Okay? So it's just kind of a primer around special education, so we're all on the same page. About 3 years ago now, we came up with our special education roadmap. And this is the vision for special education that's currently in the roadmap, and we are now in the 3rd year of our roadmap. The roadmap is focused on all students, all learned students with disabilities receiving a rigorous and high-quality education that enables them to reach their full potential. And we see inclusion for all as the overarching umbrella of that goal and vision. And for us, inclusion means that students, regardless of disability type or whether they're performing at grade level, should be included to the maximum extent possible with their general education peers, along with providing supplementary aids and supports for them in that classroom wherever possible. And that it's not just for academics, but also for all the non-academic activities that are available to other children. To reach that goal, we came up with 3 big areas where we had to focus our energies in order to make that happen. One was on high-quality services, so making sure that students have access to the services and to various levels of programming that they may need as they go through the school district. Communication with families was making sure that we are fully and actively engaged in ongoing two-way communication, and that we are being consistent, clear, and respectful and culturally competent when we're engaging with families and using the identified language of the home that the parent has indicated so that we are able to communicate in the native language. And the last one was around professional learning, so that we are ensuring that all staff were receiving access to and targeted and relevant professional learning opportunities to allow them to feel competent in moving forward with the inclusive practices. Now, inclusion has many different definitions, so as a work group, we fine-tuned what we saw as the definition of inclusion. So for Lawrence, inclusive schools is really a collaborative, respectful school culture where students with disabilities are presumed to be competent and able to develop social relationship with peers and to fully participate in the school community. And that inclusion really is a process of integrating all general education, special education initiatives and strategies in order to achieve a unified school system. So it's not about, oh, this part stays here, that part stays there. And then inclusion is not a special education initiative. Inclusion really is a way to educate students built on the belief that all students are general education students and that the general education curriculum classroom is the starting point for planning and receiving services. So it's about being inclusive for all, not just special ed, even though we're here talking about the special education piece of that. So we wanted to show you some trends in special education so you have a sense of where we've come from and where we're going. So our enrollment trend, and you'll note that the numbers here may not look like the enrollment numbers that Denise presented to you earlier this year, because those numbers now add in the out-of-district students because they are part of our enrollment in special ed, and the district is responsible for them. So over 5 years, you can see that the enrollment overall has gone up 486 students, and in special education, our enrollment has gone up 294 students. So that including all of our out-of-district students. Our percent of special education has gone up and down, but it hovers around the 20% mark at this time. And we know where some dips, our enrollment has dipped, or we've seen more students who are aging out or graduating in certain periods, so our numbers go up and down a bit over the time period.
Could you just forgive my ignorance, but what is in-district versus out-of-district?
Out of district means there's students who aren't being educated in the Lawrence Public Schools, but we're paying for them to be educated in another setting because we weren't able to provide those services in-house.
I see.
So
Okay,
Jess, we
and-
have students, for example, that require additional supports. Some of our students need significant wraparound services for emotional needs.
Okay.
And or students who are on the spectrum, autism, who need completely different, like residential support.
Okay.
And so the district then sends them to, by all means, they're like private schools, and we pay
Yeah.
tuition to those institutions.
Okay, and so, just again, I want to make sure I'm understanding the graphs correctly. On page, what's page 9 for us? So of the 14,108, 2,896 of those are special education
Yes.
students, so that's, okay,
The
one's a
20%.
total, and the other's a piece of the
But your
total.
enrollment presentation prior only told you about in-district students, so the number doesn't quite match what you saw last year, last
Right.
month, or,
Okay.
because I added in the out-of-district students.
Okay, and then just, again, forgive my ignorance, but is poverty correlated with, like, is a community that has high levels of poverty correlated with a community with high levels of special education, or is it?
I'll take that.
Yeah.
This is within, so if you see the one that has the district one, if you can bring that one back, yeah, you'll see that, let's see, where do you see that one? No, the one that had the line, Mary Lou, the one where the district,
Yeah,
Nope, go back, keep going.
yeah,
The one without special ed numbers, this next one.
yeah, this one right here. Let's see, where's the state
The
one?
state is the
So
red.
if you see the state line and us, we're sort of in the average of what other districts also have for special education. Is that your
Okay.
question, Jess? Are we
Yeah.
similar to other districts in terms of the percentage?
right, I was just
Yes.
wondering, because
Yes.
I don't know much about this, and it seemed, like, I was like, wow, that's 1 in 5 students.
Yes, so as an
I was-
example, suburban districts that are very affluent have a similar percentage.
Okay.
But in
Interesting.
terms of like the urban districts, you tend to have more numbers because student population is denser.
But the percentages are, yeah, symbolic.
So that's our percentage over 5 years. The next one's talking about our in-district versus out-of-district percentage. So as you can see, the blue line at the bottom is the stability. Our out-of-district population is not growing. We've been staying fairly stable, but if I had shown you a few years back, the numbers were very high. So we've been able to reduce that by building programs in-house to address the needs to keep students closer to home. So the trajectory in terms of our sped enrollment is increasing, but our overall enrollment in the district is also increasing. Okay. The next is a 10-year out-of-district placement. So you can see we had a high of about 187 students who were out of district, and this year we're at 132 students out of district. So by providing better services in-house and more opportunities and a variety of programs, we've been able to reduce the out-of-district cost as much as possible by providing services in-house. Although out-of-district tuitions continue to rise, so you don't always see that number go down. But
Is it, so like 55 students less than in?
yeah, it's about 30% when you, it sounds like a little amount, but it's
No, no,
30%
I think
drop.
it's a lot of students.
Yeah.
That's a lot of amount. And since I get to sign the contracts, I know what these things cost.
Yeah.
So and so just to the point of maybe the public participation earlier and also conversations I've heard about, although our intent is to provide the services they would have gotten at the out of district, are we succeeding at meeting the level?
Yeah, students that have not gone out of district are getting the services that they need in-house. If they're not, there's a process for reconvening, having discussions about what needs to change. So there's always an ongoing discussion, but the goal is always to try and educate in their community so that they have access to also community supports and peers, rather than being out, 25 miles away going to school.
And there was a real ugly rumor out there that a lot of the kids, that the diversity of the kids who are out of district versus the kids who were in district was off, in that it was not as diverse of a population. I get to see them, and Dr. Bergeron provided me a report. There's parity there.
Absolutely.
They do a really good job of making sure every student that needs to be out of district is, regardless of race or.
The out-of-district student population is representative of the same as the district's population.
Dr. Bergeron, excuse me, were you able to determine what caused the drop between 2012, 2013, and 14?
We did, we expanded programming here at the School for Exceptional Studies.
That's when the programs were expanded?
Yes.
Thank you.
The next 2 pages are our rates of full inclusion. So can we go back to 3-5? Okay. The state categorizes of ages 3 to 5 and then 6 to 21. So you can tell that we've moved from 2013 to 51% of our 3 to 5-year-olds being in full inclusion, and right now, as of last year, we're at 59.2%, which is above the state's average. The state's average is at 53.7 as of last year for this age level. The next group is the 6 to 21-year-olds, which is really first grade through end of school. We originally had 29.6% of our students in inclusion back 4 years ago. As of this past school year, we have 50.2% of our students in those age levels in a full inclusion program. And then partial inclusion, so as you see full inclusion go up, sometimes you see your partial inclusion going down, or your sub-separate going down and moving to partial inclusion. So again, in partial inclusion, our rates have gone down from 25.8% in partial, because they're moving to full, to 15.1% in the past school year. And that in the state's range, they've also gone down, but not at the same level that we have gone down in terms of partial enrollment. And it also more drastically in the 6 to 21-year-old age, because of the numbers that have gone into full inclusion in those grade structures. So as we entered into our plan and roadmap, we were nowhere near the state averages, and our goal was to start getting closer to the state averages and trends in full inclusion and partial inclusion. And at this point, we are hovering right around the state's average. In terms of our academic success, because we can't give you full MCAS data because of the change in the test to MCAS 2.0, we can give you what our MCAS alternate assessments are for our students. So these are students who, by reason of their disability, do not take the standard MCAS. They produce a portfolio of their work on the same standard and content as any other student would have to produce at their levels. So as we looked at our success, awareness means that really they don't have much in terms of what they actually know about that standard and content. Emerging means that they have some basic skill, and progressing is really almost the same as close to proficient as you can get on an MCAS portfolio. So in Lawrence last year, our ELA success rate was 76% progressing, 87% in math, and 91% in science. So the results for our portfolios were phenomenal, and only a very few number had incomplete portfolios that couldn't be scored. And this is the state's data for the same time period. So you can see we're above the state data on progressing across the board.
What percentage of students submit portfolios against, or how many against those who don't and would take the MCAS in its new version or whatever it is?
In our district, we have 1.9% of our students who are currently in the grades that take MCAS, taking alternate assessments. We've come down from 2.5% and have been moving more students towards the new competency portfolio, which the state is endorsing towards an MCAS diploma.
Thank you.
Our next data is a bit of something we're still working on. It's a number of students who have been suspended for 10 or more days who are students with disabilities. And that requires additional protections because they can't be suspended more than 10 days without hearing and going through process, et cetera. So we have reduced over the last 4 years And you notice our data ends at 16-17 because the state hasn't compiled the 17-18 data yet. We went down by 0.8% in terms of the number of students that are being suspended greater than 10 days, and the state went down at about 0.5, but they started at a lower rate than we were. So we're getting much closer to the state's range currently than we had been back a few years ago. Our graduation rate for students with disabilities, this is the 4-year graduation rate, so we often know that students with disabilities may take a little longer to graduate and they're able to stay until they turn 22, so they have time to continue their education. We have gone up about 3.5% in terms of our rate of graduation in 4 years, whereas the state has also gone up about 3%. So our gap remains fairly consistent, something we have to continue to work on. Our dropout rates for special education students have gone down 1.9% over the last 4 years, whereas the state has gone up slightly over that same time period. So we're seeing more kids persevering and staying. If they were to leave at the 4-year mark, they decide they want to come back because they didn't get that MCAS endorsed diploma, or they want to make up more courses, they're invited back to do so and to continue with their services. Okay. Now we're going to get into the meat of the Inclusion for All so that you understand where we are and what we've been doing. So as we said, last year was the 2nd year of our roadmap, and it's a 5-year roadmap. And our goals were to have inclusive practices in place for our implementation for pre-K to 6, and to start showing trends for pre-K to 4 and pre-K to 2 from moving out of sub-separate and into inclusion. So as of June of 18, our data shows that our full inclusion rates have gone from 52.8% to 71.7% for students in pre-K to 4, almost a 19% change. For partial inclusion, we went from 34% to 19.7%, which is a 14.3 drop in putting more kids into the pull-out mode. And our sub-separate rates at that same time have gone from 13.2 to 7.2%, meaning fewer kids are being placed in sub-separate placements at those grade structures in the pre-K to 2 particularly.
That's a good question. So I know in the definition of inclusion, I mean, part of it was about a mind state, right, that all kids are general ed students. But when I see the move from sub-separate partial to full inclusion, like, what's the staffing impact on that, you know, in terms of how does this look different in order to be able to really support, and as you're moving towards a more inclusive or full inclusion model, like just even from when you know, from 17 to 8, like, what impact has that had on staffing and sort of what we need to be able to? It
does require additional staffing in some locations. It depends on the model that each school is implementing. So some schools, depending on how they're modeled, they may be doing a team teaching program. So students that may have been pulled out previously and now in the classroom with the teacher in the classroom. Some schools do it is they have a combination of a para and a teacher, and they rotate between classrooms to provide the supports. But we've added additional BCBAs, we've added additional paras, we've added additional one-to-one nurses to ensure students have access to the curriculum. So it's about reallocating resources, not necessarily always expanding the budget, being able to look at the resources that are needed in a particular school to make that work.
Is there I assume with some of the savings and bringing kids back into district, hopefully that frees up some resources, right, that you can redeploy for programs here. Is that right, or is that?
That probably it did a few years back, but because the tuition rates go up each year and there's a lot of change in the tuition rates, some of our students cost for out of district is significant. Okay, so that's our work we've been doing. We're pretty much on track for meeting all of the goals that we set for year 2. And actually the next slide is what we're working on this year. So we already have all of our pre-K to 8 schools working on a school inclusion implementation plan. They're in different phases. The middle schools were the ones we were pushing for this year, so they're more in the trial and figuring out what's going to work, whereas the pre-K to mostly 6th grade have fairly good ideas and have put them into their goals for their schools. We're working still on trends for pre-K to 6 and looking at all of our subgroups in grades 3 to 6 to see now if we will see some change in their state performance on the assessments when we get the data this year compared to the previous year. We're still working hard on the ancillary services taking place in the inclusion setting. Every one of our ancillary providers has it as one of their goals this year, and they're looking at really increasing the percentage of time that they can go into a classroom to deliver service, knowing that some students, based on their needs and their disabilities, still need to come out and be seen separately from the classroom based on what they're working on. The second one is around our communication with families. We had agreed that we would do a survey, which we did start last year, but as we looked at the data, it really was more about the IEP process, and we felt that that wasn't good enough, that we needed to look at more broadly what parents were thinking about, not just the process, but also about their experience with the programs and the services their child were receiving. So that's been revamped, and that will be changed this year into a new survey format that will be going out in January. We have 2 full-time interpreters that we've hired, certified credentialed interpreters that are working.
No,
that
that's
was one
a
of my
typo.
typos.
That's a typo.
Of course, spell check didn't catch that one because it was a
Yeah.
real word.
I was hoping that we weren't celebrating that.
No, we weren't. Last night I was reading, I'm like, oh my God, I put that word in there. No, they weren't fired. They want 2 full-time hired, and we have 18 other staff across the district who have gone through the interpreter training program and are interpreting as requested by the ETFs to have an interpreter present. I'm not going to say that that hits every single meeting, and Ms. Brizuela did say there are some other pockets where people are translating, so we are working hard on looking at how do we increase that pool by running additional courses or providing for additional opportunities for people to get the credential. Our CPAC has become a very active executive board who has taken on responsibility for surveying the parents about what their needs are, what types of programs they want to see, and they're running regularly scheduled monthly meetings, and they set that schedule in the summer before school starts so parents know the schedule. And right now, we're averaging 10 to 35 parents, depending on the topic that's being addressed to that evening. And we finished our work with our language expert around our plain language glossary. So we've asked all of our staff to look at how do you write a report in language that parents can understand and be clearly interpreted if it has to be translated. So we're seeing more reports coming in without the jargon, but really explaining what is the outcome of the evaluation. This year's goals are to get our surveys going and to get an 80% rate of return on those, and to continue with the CPAC averaging a higher rate of participation on a monthly basis rather than being staggered, and to look at other members of our community wanting to become trained interpreters, and we've had several inquiries about would we run another cohort, so we're looking at that currently. Excuse me. In high-quality continuum of services, go ahead.
I just want to add a question about this or make a suggestion. I feel like, and I'm basing some of this on some of the parent leadership work that LCW's been engaged in, and we have some parents in that group who have special education students. I feel like maybe there needs to be a goal around facilitating peer support for parents who have special education students, because I do feel like while there's an enormous amount, like this is all awesome, and there's an enormous amount that needs to be done to make sure that parents have the correct information and that the language is simple and that they understand their options and so on. I feel like there's also a lot that parents can get from each other.
Absolutely, and I think that's what CPAC is working towards currently.
Okay, yeah, because I think that needs to be called out as a priority, that kind of like actively facilitating that peer and mutual support among parents is a really good thing for us to do in general among parents in the school system, and certainly for parents, who have some additional challenges that they're working with.
And I know CPAC this year, that has been one of their goals, is to have more of a culture where they're networking and providing for each other, and need to get a kind of a cohort that's a regular cohort for that to be happening on a regular basis.
Yeah.
So additional staff have been added at the district level. Like we said, we had additional 2 BCBAs, an additional 3 speech assistants, Our Director of Inclusion was hired last year and is working with Mr. Conley around the supports for inclusive practice, particularly for the students who are coming out of more sub-separate buildings into the environment. But that's only the small group of all the students that are being included across the district.
Mary Lou, could I ask a question?
Sure.
That previous slide, number 3, at the bottom, it mentions the additional staff that were added to this school and district level. Are those positions listed specific for the Gilmet School?
No.
Okay, because it
The
looks like...
facilitator was put in place for the Gilmet School to pilot that Gilmet inclusion, but now she is working with the other schools that have expanded that program this year. So we have 3 other sites that are doing similar work.
All right. Just to interject, I was part of the team that met and developed this roadmap, and I remember the voices of the participants there, and we as a group, we were concerned about support bodies being placed in buildings to help facilitate this inclusion process. If you don't have the bodies, you're setting yourself up for failure.
Mm-hmm.
And my concern is, have we provided the schools with, we have the expectation that they're doing it at certain grade levels. Have we provided each school with the necessary bodies to see this through?
Many of the schools actually in their budget process added additional special education teachers or paras. We at the district have added additional support staff to provide them with what they need.
Thank you.
I think it's an evolution, so as they get more involved, they may decide they need to make some shifts and changes. Okay, so we went okay. Our priorities this year were again to, go ahead, oh, no, Dave, one back. So we're working on our monitoring system for checking implementation of the services so that we can get a baseline to make sure that there is a consistent implementation of the work that they're doing. And looking at our own data to have dashboards so that we can see which schools are being more effective in making those changes and moving students to a least restrictive environment. Professional learning was the last one, which has a lot to do with getting staff ready and to feel comfortable and competent in being able to address the needs of all students in the classroom. And we have done extensive trainings over the last couple of years, bringing in some experts in the area of inclusion, in the area of social competencies and communication, and doing trainings for cohorts at the schoolhouse, doing coaching and mentoring at the school, doing district-wide trainings, and the content has varied depending on the needs of each individual building. But as you can see, that there are common themes that are listed there that all schools have been asking for, particularly around modifying the classroom to meet the needs of students with disabilities, differentiating instruction, working on with students on the spectrum, because not everybody had worked with students on the autism spectrum, and there was an anxiety about that, but as they've gotten to know the students, they're feeling that, oh, okay, this isn't much different, I just have to know a little bit different strategies to work with this particular child. And then really focusing in on Tier 2 and Tier 3 behavioral interventions, not just for special education, but even in the general education setting, because that ultimately helps the special ed student. And our goal for this year is to continue getting a larger menu of those services that are available for students and staff to participate in training. Okay, and our highlights, as I know I'm talking fast, there's a lot to cover, but our highlights, we feel, for this past year have been that staffing needs were addressed during the budget process, so that we were able to add an additional BCBA, 2 additional psychologists, 2 speech pathologists, 5 paras, and 2 LPNs at the district level, as well as our assistant director for grades 7 through 12. All of our schools are embracing inclusion. Some are going slower and taking a little more hesitant approach, but they're all talking about it, and they're all looking at practices that will work within their school. Even the high school has started down that road, and they were the last group we expected that we would be moving towards. Our interpreter services have increased, and our document translation has become more compliant with timelines, and that is always an ongoing process, being able to access and making sure people are accessing those services. We did ours on 2 slides, so it was big enough to read on the file. We have contracted providers that have been integral to the work, and staff and schools are asking, can they have more time with these individuals? So we're trying to respond to that demand to make sure that they have what they need. By adding supports, we're able to service more students within their neighborhood community and neighborhood school, which allows for greater social network for them and greater parent engagement at that schoolhouse. Evaluations, I said, being written in plain language. And the CPAC truly has been very active in working out and worked with the mayor's office to run our first community-wide sensory-friendly events this summer. So it's been a big change for that. Now, we're not perfect, we know. There's a lot of work we need to do, and that has to do with expanding options to create a better interpreter pool, because the volume that we need is significant. Implementing a monitoring system to gather data on all the best practices that people are doing in inclusion, and then helping the staff to make decisions about what's the next steps. Looking at our reviews at the middle and high school to help them figure out their continuum so that they're ready to roll out inclusion for the next school year or the following year. Strengthening behavioral supports across all grade levels, like I said, both general and special education. Another big one for us is recruiting and retaining our ancillary staff. Speech and language therapists and assistants are at high demand. There are 38,000 vacancies across the country for speech and language pathologists. So they can pretty much write their own ticket. Occupational therapists and physical therapists are BCBAs, board certified behavior analyst and school psychologist. So we get them here because we're one of the few communities that will actually give them their intern year or their clinical fellowship year, and they stay for a couple of years and then they're moving on. So trying to retain them has been a challenge, even working with the universities and the colleges that are preparing students, particularly around bilingual personnel. It's like very difficult to find, and we're working with multiple agencies to help recruit with us. So it's something we're really focused on trying to recruit more strongly.
Do we know what's the retention, like, I don't know if this is a good idea or not, but have we done like exit interviews with people, or like what's going on? What could we be doing as a community to help? Because it strikes me that it's best on a number of levels if we can retain people, right, and keep them in the system, in the community. It's less expensive for us. They have long-term relationships with families. It's all. So what are the challenges? Is it housing? What is the?
Many of them will tell you they've moved on because they've relocated, they've moved on because they got married, they've moved on because they're going back to school, especially the speech and language assistants are now going to become therapists. They're moving on to places where they will get a better pay.
Yeah.
They can go into private practice and probably make more than they're making here. So we've worked on their pay and made some adjustments to the pay to try and make sure that that's not the issue, but there are a wide range of reasons why people are leaving, but.
So there's not like a few themes that emerge in that, really?
Well, money, because they can pretty much sell their services and pick and choose where they want to be and when they want to be there. So it is something that we have been focused on, but ongoing issue. Continue with our ongoing professional learning opportunities and continuing to work with the CPAC board to expand their membership and also to give them a greater voice in terms of what's happening in the district around our students with disabilities. So I'm ending with questions.
Questions?
That was a lot, and I just, what I remember of the last time we had this presentation was a list of, and I'm sorry, I'm going to go to the negative real quick. There was a list of deficiencies. What struck me about how you got,
The disabilities?
of how the disability, how the IEPs were being implemented. There was a bunch of,
When we had our program review, yes.
and that was, the part that struck me was that, the number of students that were in these programs and the amount of deficiency was really, really small. But if you're student or family member that has that deficiency, it's not a small deal, it's a big deal. And is that something that we're gonna get later? And basically, it showed how we were doing towards the state law and the.
So all of our notes where we had corrective actions have all been cleared with the state. But they're doing a new tiered focus monitoring, so every year they're monitoring certain indicators that they're going to be looking at. So they're coming to visit us in March again, so we'll know how we're doing on those indicators.
So can you, because just for the rest of the group, I didn't even remember what it was called. So what is it that you went through?
A comprehensive program review,
Okay.
a coordinated program review, I'm
And
sorry.
in that, it had a bunch of the deficiencies.
We had several indicators that we had not met the full requirements that the state was looking for, and we had to do corrective action and training, and we cleared all those within the 1 year that you're allowed to have to complete them.
Will we have that presentation again?
We can add that to the calendar later this year if that's what the
Again,
committee
'cause
would like.
I think this is the informative piece of it. What I found about the other piece was that so many wraparound services are being provided. I felt like you guys were hitting it 99.9% of the time up to that report, but that report was really telling about what the stuff we were hearing from the ground. So if we're gonna see that later, that'd be awesome.
Other questions? Superintendent, do you want to call the next report?
Yes,
Thank you,
team, thank you.
Cynthia, can I?
Yes.
I do want to just make one
Sure,
comment.
sure.
It's just, I feel like this issue around the area of continued focus around the staffing, right? I know, like, we have so much on our plates in just terms of thinking about student success and teacher preparation and all of that. But this, to me, is a place that begs larger coordination with, like, the Workforce Investment Board or the Career Center or community partners in an effort to kind of grow our own. And so I know that we have a lot in terms of priorities for this year, but I'm going to probably keep raising that as a point for us as a board and as a school community, that I do think that there's, and the parent to paraprofessional program that's being implemented is maybe one baby step towards some of that, but I think we need to look at more things like that so that we're kind of growing our own from within the community, and maybe some of those folks are also going to be more likely to stay because they have roots here, and they'll have some of the cultural competence that we're looking for already anyway. And it's just something for us to think about on top of all of this great work that's being done. I just
Thank
think
you,
it's
Jess. Yeah, we'll keep
priority.
that in mind across the district for all staffing at all levels.
Yeah.
Yeah. Thank-
I'm sorry, Superintendent, I just want to note before you call the next report that Frank Mclaughlin, President of Lawrence Teachers Union, is here. Just wanted to acknowledge him.
Thanks, Mary Lou.
Yep, come on up.
Up next, we're going to have our, okay, Assistant Superintendent Mary Toomey is going to get queued up while Frank addresses, and then we can get her presentation up there.
I just wanted to say hello to the board and wish you all a happy Thanksgiving. And I just, I'm going to use these opportunities where I can get them. Number one, that's confronting the teachers and students in Lawrence is obviously the gas crisis. And I'm going to say in front of all of you right now, what a terrific job your Mayor Dan Rivera is doing. I said this, I couldn't be more proud of him. Honest to God, I couldn't be more proud of him. My former student, to do what he's done, such a leadership role, so commendable, so commendable. And I didn't have the opportunity many times in class, although I did have opportunities, but never to say anything that great about the mayor. So I do want to express that.
That's a true statement.
And the teachers union is working very, very hard to support the students, families, and teachers of Lawrence. We've engaged. The reason why I was late today is what we're actually doing is we're giving $300 gift cards to Market Basket for all of our teachers that were affected by the gas crisis. And they're very grateful. And one of the things that we're doing is we're asking the teachers to fill out a survey because we want to collect data, because what we want to do is we want to offer our perspective when the hearings are held in Washington, D.C. and in Boston. The teachers union will be submitting testimony. I was very proud last week with Cynthia Paris, our superintendent, very energetic. We toured the school system with the national president of the American Federation of Teachers, Randy Weingarten. We had an excellent tour of the Breen School. There isn't a more dynamic principal that you have than Margot, Amy. A terrific what we saw in that school with the children and teachers of Lawrence. And I was so proud. Saddened at the same time as we're touring some of these sites, some of these trailers where our children and families are living. It is a very, very cold night. It is going to snow on Thursday. With that, I do want you to know that there are a lot of alumni that support you in the efforts that you do. The Lawrence Alumni Association sponsored this past Saturday, the Centennial Commemoration of World War I. We had a very moving and meaningful ceremony in the foyer of this very school. I would invite you to walk by and to look at the marble plaque that is still there from the soldiers that died 100 years ago. And one of the points that I made to the children that came, particularly the children from the international school, is how old those young men were when they went to Europe and died for the freedom that we all enjoy in this country. The very same ages as our children. So I did want to touch on that. I know there are some other positive things. We had a great volleyball team, undefeated until last night in the state semifinals. I'm so proud of the girls and the students of Lawrence High School. They really showed the resilience of this city in its most troubling times. So with that, I'm going to finish. I'm a political guy. And I'll finish on a political note. You all are acting as the legislature branch of the school department in Lawrence. And what we saw at voting day last week is very, very encouraging, particularly in Lawrence, particularly the number, as I look at my superintendent, of female candidates that are elected to high office. People like Senator Diana DeZoglio, Representative Christina Minicucci, new Representative Tran. All very, very proud. All very proud of the direction that this country is going. It all begins and ends here in Lawrence. You know it does. The eyes of the world are on you. Keep fighting and keep doing what you do for the children, families of Lawrence, and we support your efforts and continue these positive efforts. Thank you so much.
Up next, we're going to have Assistant Superintendent Mary Toomey give us a standards-based grading report update. So Mary has been working with our school leaders and school teams on this for a few years now, Mary, so go ahead.
Thank you very much. Good evening, everybody. It's my pleasure to be here with you all tonight. I know you've had a lot of information this evening, so my intention is to go as quickly as possible, but also to excite you about what's been going on. We are a little late at this transition to standards-based grading and report cards. Many districts in the state and across the country have already made this transition, but it served us really well. We have been studying this for over 2 years now, and it allowed us to sort of learn from the lessons of some other places, and I'm really proud of the work that our committee has put together, and I want to share with you an update about where we've been and what's happening now in our district. So, just a little review about what the standards are intended to do. Obviously, at their basic level, they tell us what students should know and be able to do at each grade level. I thought I was on fire there, David. Here we go. And so, Massachusetts, being ahead of the curve as we are, established our frameworks back in 1996, and they were modified here and there through 2011. And the significant change happened in 2011 when we all heard about Common Core state standards, and those came about as a way to sort of realign things across many, many states. And then being, as we are in Massachusetts, in 2016, we decided that while we are pretty much aligned to Common Core, we need new frameworks that maybe go a step further. So starting in 2016 with the science, technology, and engineering, and then in 2017, we adopted new ELA and math standards. And then 2018, most recently, this past June, the state has provided us with brand new framework for history and social science. So Massachusetts always being ahead of the curve. The Common Core at its very basis is a clear set of shared goals and expectations. It talks about the knowledge and skills that students need in all of those core subjects, but it's the premise is so that all of our kids can be prepared to succeed in college, career, and life. That's the real mission of having the Common Core. Just a little slow on the uptake here, David. They are aligned with the expectations for college and career. We need them to be clear so that educators and parents know what they need to do to help students learn. Are you driving, David? Not me, right? Okay. All right, I'll stop driving. They're consistent across the states and schools, so students are not taught to a lower standard because of where they live. And they're based on both content and application. And that's really important. And that's been a big shift even with our state testing, right? We're not just testing memorization of things. We're not just talking about content. We really want kids to use critical thinking skills because they're applying their knowledge in new ways. Higher order thinking skills are very important. And the standards are realistic. They're very real for effective use in the classroom, and they're informed by not only states in the United States, but by other top-performing countries so that all students are prepared to succeed in a global economy. That's just a little primer on Common Core. So why are we ready to do this? Why we're ready to kind of do what we're doing? About 3 years ago now, we partnered with an organization called Unbound Ed. And the group of educators that formed this organization, this nonprofit, are a team of former classroom teachers, curriculum writers, school leaders, and education experts who worked in the public, private, and non-profit sectors. And those folks are really dedicated. Their mission is to provide free, high-quality, standards-aligned resources for the classroom and the opportunity for immersive training through what they call the Standards Institute. We are proud to partner with education. They are proud to partner with education organizations to improve educational opportunities across the country for all students. So they partner with folks like the Achievement Network that we're also partnering with. And so we came to know them, like I said, about 3 years ago. The Standards Institute, that 5-day immersive piece that goes on, is really been sort of the keystone to our learning about standards. You know, as a career educator, all of it here in the Lawrence Public Schools, I felt like I had a good handle on the initial frameworks and, you know, what the standards work was about until I went to my first 5-day intensive institute. And it sort of really caused me to reflect on thinking about the standards deeper, thinking about issues of equity, thinking about how students of color and students living in poverty, what their experience is going to be like in order to get them to college and career successfully. As the first person in my family to obtain a college education, it was really important to my family that happened, just the way our families are doing that today in Lawrence. My dad started at the Leonard School. He didn't speak English. And so we understand why all of this is so important. Keep on going, David. So I just want to show you that to date, more than 150 of our educators, teachers, leaders have been to Standards Institute. They happen all across the country. They are really intensive, wonderful opportunities. And this has prepared us in these schools for what's coming next. So that's why we feel really fully prepared. The next institute is going to be in February, and registration is now open, so encourage all your friends. Here's a couple of photos I thought you would enjoy because you will recognize some of our principals, some of our educators, and our leaders. There's one photo there from Orlando in July of 2017, and another one in Fort Lauderdale in February of 2017. We also didn't just stop there with our partnership with Unbound Ed. We also use that as a catalyst to launch an in-district network community of practice with folks from Unbound Ed and our partners at Achievement Network, so that we have leaders and teachers getting together. We're in our 3rd year of this work, and we have these sessions at host schools where we really study standards deeply. We visit classrooms, we debrief about practice, and our own learning improves as a result. And we have many leaders and teachers who have really appreciated that process. So that was a little bit, David, you can back up one slide. That was a little bit about where we've been. We started this work on standards-based grading with the mission to not only think about a new report card, but to really start with this ideal of sort of shifting the mindset around what grading is about, why we do grading. So we put a work group together in 2015-16 that met on their own time. They volunteered to come together. And then we expanded that in 2016-17. This is just a sampling of the membership of folks who've participated over the last couple of years. Okay.
Just a question, Mary.
Sure.
Are the participants chosen, or
They volunteered.
They're volunteer?
They volunteered. All the schools were asked if they wanted to participate, if they had any membership, and those folks volunteered.
And
to
does the school pay for the week-long training as
So,
well, and the travel, or?
The work group for standards-based grading, that was all volunteer. We did that here in district. But the Standards Institute tuition, we, of course, earned some scholarships to do that from Unbound Ed. They had some funders that helped us to get folks to Institute. And then principals, because they have autonomy over their budgets, are able to fund the balance of the tuition and the travel to get folks where they need to go.
Okay, thank you.
So this is just a timeline showing you a little bit about our process over the last few years and where we've been. Starting with just that research about what is standards-based grading, and we learned a lot about that. And we were able to provide feedback to all of our schools. We created a PowerPoint that all of our principals used. We did a principal meeting. All of those things happened. And then we collected in the 2nd year, in phase 2, we collected feedback from the key stakeholders about what they thought should really happen. I did a presentation to school committee last year about where we were in the process. And then phase 3 happened. And if I had known what was going to happen in phase 3 back at the beginning, I might have, asked somebody else to take this on. It was the work of really creating the templates and doing, the critical work of uploading all of the standards, into the templates that need to be loaded into our data management system to make that happen. A couple of key people helped us in the district to do that. It just all came together, and we were able to do it. And we decided that maybe we should move our timeline up, and rather than wait until fall of this year, what if we asked a school, let's ask the Weatherby, they have all grades, K through 8. Would they consider piloting our new report card last term 3 of last school year? And they said yes. And so we were able to do that. We were able to then collect some family feedback as a result of issuing those report cards. We made sure that families were very aware. We held parent information sessions. We sent information home to parents so that they understood what was happening. Teachers did that with their students. And now we are ready at this point. We have launched what we're calling our Pioneer Schools new report card happening now. David, can you go to the next slide, please? Thank you. So report cards at their very base are just communication tools. The real purpose is to provide accurate information and feedback to students and families. They should talk about progress toward meeting the grade level standards. That's the real purpose. And our rationale for providing these report cards is because students learn differently. They learn in different ways. They learn at different rates. We need consistency in all of our schools and from classroom to classroom. We need an accurate representation of student progress, and we need to inform everyone of the specific strengths and areas for growth that will lead to success down the road. The traditional report card doesn't work anymore because what that does is usually provide one grade, usually a letter, for a whole content of coursework. Mathematics, for example. The parent receives the report card. The report card states mathematics, and then there's a letter, an A, a B, or a C. Parents have no idea what went into coming up with that particular letter grade. And when we look at mathematics as the example, you can see from this slide all of the different domains that are included. So are we talking about geometry? Was the teacher working on measurement and data this term? What in mathematics was the child working on? The parent has absolutely no idea. In a standards-based report card, every content is defined by the specific academic skills and knowledge so that parents will have detailed information about those skills that the child has required and where they may need additional instruction and support. And this is the key piece. If we're going to provide a report card that's going to give information, we need to provide that information specifically about the strengths, yes, but also where does the child need to improve so that teachers and parents can get that job done and help them. Here's the big shift. This slide is really important. This is the big difference between a traditional and a standards-based grading system. And this is where we had to do some education with teachers. In a traditional report card in a grading system, we're averaging. Child takes a quiz, child has a test, child does homework, whatever it is. All of those are put into a grade book. The end of the term, the teacher averages. They may have a weighting system. Some things may be weighted stronger than others. But in traditional grading, it's averaged at the end of the term. So in our example up here about the child who has trying 7 or 8 times, you can see that all of those numbers go in and the average would be a 73, which is about a C or C minus. In a standards-based grading system, we understand that children need time to practice a skill, and they need time to do it more than once, and that we should really be looking at a mastery system. And mastery happens at the end of your instruction, after the teacher has had time to teach it, and the student has had a chance to learn it and practice it. That's the big difference. And if we look at the last 2 tries for this particular example, we can see that the student was at mastery. And that's what we want to be able to report. Next slide, David. This is just a sample of, what the difference is. We're not looking at that 1 grade for English anymore. This shows you all the domains of English, and this also shows you what the subcategories would be that represent the standards that occur. The academic performance indicators that our work group chose for our report card in Lawrence follow the MCAS indicators with E, M, P, and N. The same indicators that parents are receiving for MCAS, so that there's little confusion there.
Before you go back, can you back one more slide? So this idea of focusing on the mastery, is this where everyone is going towards? Is this just?
Yes.
This is, the bar is being changed for everybody in this direction.
Correct. It's a mastery model, yeah. Okay, David. Next one. Thank you. Keep going. Thank you. So another big difference is that in a traditional report card, when teachers are grading and averaging, they often include things like behavior, attention, attendance, homework, effort, extra credit. If you bring in tissues, you have 5 extra points on your grade. So all of those things get averaged in oftentimes. And parents don't know how that grade was calculated. Including those factors in the overall grade, it does create significant variability in grading and increases the likelihood that the grade is actually subjective and doesn't really give us what we need. It makes it much more difficult for us to be able to report student success to parents on the specific skills that we want to show. Everybody's experienced that, right? Yeah. However, there is an important need to be able to share important information around pro-social skills with parents. And on our new report cards, we've divided pro-social skills into 2 categories. The first category is personal development. Those are the things that help us with classroom and community skills. And then the second area is approaches to learning. So we want to know that, the child is listening attentively, follows directions. We also want to know how well they get along with peers. And rather than use the letters that we're using in our performance indicators for the content, we're using a numbering system, 4, 3, 2, 1, that will tell the parent how consistently the child is adapting to all of those pro-social skills. This is only a representative sample. It's a much longer list than this, so teachers will have plenty of space to be able to provide this information, but it will be much more specific than it has been in the past. Next slide. Our committee loves this slide, and in my going around to all of the different schools and doing parent presentations about this one resonates with all of our families because it's easy to sort of relate to. When most of us have had the experience of teaching someone to ride a bike or learning to ride a bike yourself, and at the beginning we're practicing, we need the training wheels on, so we're not yet meeting. And then when we're partially meeting, you know that feeling when you're holding on to the back of the seat and the child is just starting to pedal and ride on their own? They're getting there. And keep in mind that the goal is just for the child to be riding on their own. Meeting is the absolute goal in a standards-based system. That's where we want every child to get. We want them to be at meets. But then you have those kiddos who they're going to pop the wheelie, they're going to run up the ramp, do the tricks, and that's why we have the E for exceeds, because those children are doing more than what's expected for the grade level standard. And so those are the different places. Some reminders. The student performance level represent the student's performance at the time that the teacher is marking the report card or finishing that set of standards instruction. It's not an average. It's not unusual for a child to earn a range of indicators. So this isn't about, my child has all A's and B's. So that kind of language doesn't belong in a standards-based report card because students are going to they're going to show where the strengths are, but we also need to show what's coming next. Where are the needs? And for students with accommodations, the content of the standard remains the same, but the instructional strategies that we use and the methods for demonstrating that mastery of the standard, those may be adjusted. And there's a box on the report card that teachers can use to show that the instruction was with modifications. Every student, including those with special needs and our English learners, should have the opportunity for review and practice. That's what this is about, giving children the opportunity to practice, review, and get everyone to mastery. This is our desired outcome. We want to increase student achievement, and that happens when teachers and students have clear and explicit learning targets. You can see the graphic on the left where the child is, a little confused, thinks he's doing okay in math, but sometimes is confused, is not specific about what's happening, to the child on the right who has very specific information that says, I understand how to add and subtract multi-digit numbers, but I know I need to work on automaticity of math facts. Very specific strength and weakness. I told you that we did a survey of the parents after the third term. It was a little difficult because students received their report card on the last day of school in June, so the families aren't there anymore. We have to outreach to them via email. And we did do that. There's roughly about 300 families at the Weatherby, and we received over 50 responses, and this is the result. So, between 60 and 70% of the responses were very favorable, strongly agree with all of those questions that were on the survey that parents received. So we were very happy with that. So for this year, we were set to think about, after the pilot, let's roll out to the whole district. And then the superintendent and I spoke about this and said, there are certainly schools that are ready to do this work. They've been engaging. Their teachers are using standards to plan instruction. They've been grading this way, for a while now. So why don't we ask the schools, which schools are ready? And so we did that. And I told the superintendent, I thought there would be about 6, and including the Weatherby. And instead, we had 12 schools respond. We're referring to them as our pioneer standards-based grading schools. They represent roughly 60% of our K-8 schools. About 6,500 students will receive a standards-based report card for the first time, whether it be the second time, coming up in December. So, as if DESE knew that we were planning this, they recently released a wonderful, wonderful tool for parents, Massachusetts Learning Standards, parent guides, family guides, that they have released on their website, and we have posted under curriculum and instruction on the Lawrence website, and it talks about what needs to happen for every student. Next slide. And so these guides are there to help families understand what students are expected to know and be able to do, and to help families and teachers work together. They are in English, Spanish, Brazilian Portuguese, and simplified Chinese. They cover right now ELA, math, and science, and they'll be adding the history and social science soon. There's one for every grade, pre-K all the way through 8th grade, and a comprehensive guide for high school, grade 9 through 12. The website link is there, but as I said, you don't even need to write it down because David Pekarsky has posted it on the Lawrence Public School website under curriculum and instruction. And David, you are going to pull that website out just so we can show how great it is, if you can get to that. Once you get to it, that's what it is, gives you a little information, and then you can see that all the links are there by grade level, by language. So you just go down to the grade level that you want, you pull it up, and you can see it's a 4-page guide with beautiful graphics. Below that, keep going, David, there are some wonderful 3 to 4 minute videos by grade level that feature educators, school leaders, folks from DESE talking about the importance of standards and how we're using them in all of our schools across Massachusetts. So those are wonderful resources. I provided Joan Malone with a folder for each of you that has samples of our new report cards, just to share with you, and a sample of one of these family guides. So Joan will give those to you. If anybody has any questions, I'll be happy to answer those.
Can I just quickly, so first of all, for the record, DESE did something well, right? I mean, not always, just saying. But we are really proud of those. One question. First of all, I love the move to standards-based learning, and just the intentional approach of pilot and the buy-in and investment of educators to build it, I think is right on.
Thank you.
What does the engagement with family? So, in schools that I've run where we've moved to this, like the first school, we made a pretty big mistake where we moved to this and didn't do enough engagement with families, and it was a high school, and people were like, wait a minute, where's my grade? So the mindset of shifting from the traditional was something that people know and just feel comfortable with. So what have you all done, or what are you doing, I guess, to sort of anticipate that or engage with families? Because it is the way that most of us grew up doing
Absolutely,
school.
absolutely. And, and that's what we have to do, is we have to educate everyone. And to be very honest, the families and the students have been the easier sell. It's harder, I think, for a teacher who's used to typical grading measures and averages to sort of get used to a new system where they're looking at it differently. That's why we really wanted to gauge readiness for schools that were already at a place where they were ready to go. I have been going around to schools that have invited me, our pioneer schools that have invited me to come in and speak with families. We have the presentation in English and Spanish. We always have an interpreter there so that they can receive the same information translated as I am presenting it to them. We take questions, and the questions have been great, and families love the idea that they're getting more information. The other thing, we've done a couple of other things with the report cards that I didn't put in the presentation here, but they're pretty remarkable. Our old report card only had 70 characters available for a comment. We've increased that for English language arts to almost 500. So a teacher can write a pretty hefty narrative about the child's progress, and parents love that. In the other content areas, we've tripled it, the size of what teachers can write. In our old version of the report card, after term 1 was over and it was time for term 2, the term 1 comment disappeared. We could only see one comment for each term at a time. Now the comments are going to remain. So that record will continue to grow, and they'll be able to go back and reference. In our former report card, we had the first 2 pages in English, and then it was followed by the Spanish translation. It was really important to the work group that we brought the translation right up against the standard line. So everything happens English, Spanish, right there on the report card. We kept the same length. We're still at 4 pages. Another thing with open architecture and our unique needs in Lawrence is that schools have some control over their curriculum, over their scope and sequence, and how they're rolling that out. So we have a very unique standards-based report card. We didn't cherry pick which standards we were going to choose, as we saw in some of the samples we reviewed. We created a report card where the teacher has access to every standard that is in the Massachusetts framework in their grade book. What the parent sees is a representation of what we call cluster standard parent statements, each referring to 1 or more standards, sometimes 3, sometimes 4, never more than that, so that they're getting a good representation. The report card shows you, when you look at English language arts, it takes the whole first page. That's an entire year's worth of curriculum. It's up to the school to decide the order in which they want those standards to be assessed. And we don't have to tell every school that they have to do it in the same way. The schools have been working on how they're going to roll that out. The other thing that was unique to Lawrence is that every school chooses their own electives. So we don't have art, music, gym, health, theater in every school. Some schools have a different arrangement. So we settled on about 14 courses. We polled the schools, and then each school was allowed to select their own. And so they have a unique page 4 report for their electives, and we're calling those now integrated studies. We used to call them specials, but now we call them integrated studies. So we're adopting some new language.
Thank you.
Mary, is there any plan after the rollout in December to survey parents again? And it would be interesting to survey the teachers, too.
Absolutely.
And I'm going to go one step further, even the kids.
Absolutely.
To
And I
see
think it will be easier because we're in school, so we'll be able to do a
Right.
paper pencil survey, and we'll be able to collect a lot more information that way.
And could you come back again with the results of that?
I'm happy to come back anytime
Okay.
you invite me.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mary, for that wonderful presentation. I think it's great, the new system that you're adopting, and I hope that parents will take advantage of going online and looking up for in ways on how they can help their kids. Is this grading system going to, have you determined whether this will impact the way the MCAS testing will be, how this grading system will impact the MCAS for the
So,
children?
as a former principal in Lawrence, I can tell you that one of the most difficult things was, when a parent would ask to see me during report card time and would say, I have my child's MCAS results, and my child, didn't do as well as I had hoped, and you've placed my child on the honor roll. Why is there a disconnect?
Right.
And so that's been a frequent piece. And so helping parents to understand what that means. And a standards-based report card, it isn't punitive. It just means that everybody has strengths and everybody has places to grow. And so that's why we've aligned our performance indicators to match and mirror those of the MCAS. And hopefully we're going to see a little more alignment around that kind of need. But that's another area that's been difficult for us, but that's a great question.
I just hope that with this, we can make some changes to the way that the MCAS impact the students based on the fact that everybody has a different way of learning. And it's not necessarily that some of them are not passing it just because of one thing, but because there are many other factors
That's exactly
in their
right.
lives that affect this. Thank you.
Mr. Chair, just, in all this discussion about how this works, and just because I'm always interested in how this impacts specific kids in our district that are from specific countries, is there any conversation about how grading happens in Dominican Republic or Guatemala or Vietnam? that the kids are bringing that stuff with them here, and the parents are bringing these expectations with them here, and how this will affect that? Is that,
I'm not
everybody
familiar.
can learn, everybody can learn a new way.
Sure.
The question is there a bridge in any of this?
Yeah, I'm not familiar with that. It hasn't come up in any of our meetings with the families, because we've been presenting it as a way to provide you with more detailed information. So we can tell you about math facts. We can tell you about, reading informational text and being able to identify key details. We're providing you with specific information about what your child is learning and where they need to go. And then it also allows the teacher a chance, if a child, is receiving an N or a P in one particular area, the teacher can then the next term decide to give the child more intensive instruction around that particular cluster of standards and then reassess them again in the second term. So if the teacher's not locked or limited to only assessing some standards during each term. They can do what they need to do. They can really individualize teaching and learning, which is what it should really be about. It should be an individualized thing, if that we're really using it as a communication tool. And for those students who are English learners and those students who are special education students, in addition to this report, their report card will go home with also a progress report, a more narrative progress report that's required, so that they'll have much more detailed information.
First of all, I want to thank you because I learned a new word tonight, automaticity. That's awesome. That's a good word. Automaticity, yeah, that was cool. I just wanted to pick up on the mayor's point and say, I know it's always a balance with open architecture between what you're mandating from central office and what you're allowing the schools to do, but it does strike me that as this system gets implemented, which I think is great, that it might be good to gently suggest from central office that each school really should have some kind of parent information session around this, and it shouldn't just be the ones that ask you to come in, but that there should be like a more centralized effort to maybe inform parents in case there are some of those expectations that the mayor was talking about. There are certainly different, styles of schooling in the different countries of origins of our fabulous population here, and so I think that might be helpful.
Definitely. And so we did send communication home in English and Spanish to all the families in the Pioneer schools. And all of the schools are doing some kind of parent outreach, whether that was in their welcome back meeting or during their PTO meetings. They're all doing some kind of outreach. We also had the opportunity at one of the President's Council meetings, not the last one, but I think the one before that, where Superintendent invited me to come and make a presentation to President's Council. So we had an opportunity there to kind of share this information. So we're getting it out there and making sure that parents are aware that this is coming and that we'll be available for any questions as this happens. And the kids themselves, some of the schools have opened the parent portal, which is another feature that we have in our database system, so that as a teacher grades a particular assignment in live time, the parent gets that report on their phone, and they can see that. And middle school students enjoy watching in live time what their grades are and seeing how their grades are going up and down. And a lot of them, the middle school principals are telling me they're very motivated by watching this system and how it's happening. So anything that engages kids in the process of their own learning, I think is great. So we're going to try to keep that up and keep it going.
Just one more question, sorry, before we move on. So, we don't have to answer it now, but I'm just very curious too with the pro-social skills. Like, I like separating those from the standards, but I guess I would just, and we could talk about this later, hope that there's some calibration and particularly like conversations around cultural relevance when it comes to, teachers assessing things like, for example, a kid effectively communicates with adults. Like, I think there's like some cultural probably beliefs around what that should look like.
Yeah.
That I'd just be curious how each school is going about calibrating what that looks like,
Sure.
Considering different kids'
Absolutely
backgrounds.
makes sense and is a good point. And I think that those are the kind of feedback pieces that we want from this Pioneer rollout so that we can make some course corrections and adjustments over the summer before we ask the rest of our schools to come on board next fall. And we'll be ready, and we'll be 100% ready to roll with this. So I appreciate that. And as you guys review anything else like that comes up, please, feel free to email or, send me information. I'm happy to take those up with the committee, and we'll see where we go. So I really appreciate that.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you, Mary.
Thank you.
One more question, John? I'm sorry. Just a thought. If you have conferences in December where the parents come and meet with the teachers, and the teachers are not going to be able to take a large amount of time to explain this report card, would it be worth having a parent meeting after the first conference so that parents could, once they have that report card in their hand, they can ask questions and get further clarification about what this looks like and what it means?
Sure.
I mean, it's just a.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I think that's a great suggestion.
Thanks,
Thank
Pat.
you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Mary. Great, thank you. So up next, if you look at your agenda in your packets on page 4, I wanted to follow up from where John introduced earlier the process of the superintendent's evaluation. I'll be projecting that up there as well, but I wanted to share with you my original thinking. And then next month, we should have conversations about adopting these in full and or feedback ideas that you have around them. So this is in alignment and directly correlates with the teacher and the administrator's assessment. So DESE provides a rubric and it provides clear guidance about what the goals need to address. There's a professional practice goal, there's a district improvement goal, and then finally, there is a student learning goal. Attached to that, each of the proposed goals has some key action steps. These I have built with my leadership team. I've gotten input from them. And so again, I welcome some of that input from you all. You'll see that my first goal is the professional practice goal. And as I had mentioned earlier in this year, we have 42 new superintendents that participate in the new induction program. Today I participated in a full session. It included things like what do you do with entry plan? How do you present that to the community? It included things like how's it going with your school visits? What do you look at? So they're constantly supporting us in our skills and checking back and calibrating and giving us tools to think about how to be instructional leaders. Around that, there are some assignments. There is monthly coaching visits. You met Carla, I think last month she was here. So she's been observing me in different settings. She's come to the leadership meeting. She's come to school visits. She's come to one of these board meetings. And I meet with her a couple times a month in addition to conversations that I have with her on email, on text, and phone calls. Next, the district improvement goal is in part my ability to be able to keep momentum as we transition in this year. And so some of the things that I'm suggesting happen in this time is that I complete my listening tour, that I continue to work with the leadership team in key goals that we have going in the collaboration, and that I end up sort of coming back to you all and sharing with you my key findings and then some recommendations for the turnaround plan. The other improvement goal that I'm suggesting here is that I take in consideration that this is a new working relationship with you all and for the district as a governance, and that I maintain a positive and transparent relationship. So some of those things will be that I establish some good communication with you all, both individually and collectively. I have now established a practice with John of meeting with him on a weekly basis, and of course maintaining communication as often as needed. And then I also want to think about other ways of engaging you all personally in different issues that you're interested in, that I'm going to need support with, and I'm going to need to be getting advice and consulting with you all. The last thing that I'm proposing is that I have a student learning goal. This is directly tied to some of the summative data that we shared with you last month, and this is about chronic absenteeism. I think we started some of this work already at the district level as my leadership team and myself have started to think through what are some of the ways to create awareness district-wide. And so I'm proposing that we continue this effort and stay focused on that. And at this point, we've shared data and presentations with our President's Council, which includes families, students, administrators. I've shared this with you all, and I'm happy to revisit that specific presentation, of course, with the school leaders, and we'll continue to be addressing that with them individually. Then we're going to be highlighting initiatives and strategies that are working for some of our schools and sharing some of those best practices, and then adopting them district-wide. So we hope that by doing some of these efforts, we will reduce the absenteeism as measured by last year's January to June. It might be a little bit more, a little bit less, but it's sort of a timeline and a framework. So these are, again, proposals. This is our best thinking around some of the guidelines that DESE offer us, and then initial learnings that I've had of my 100-day listening. And I welcome your input. Again, we're going to have conversation about this next month, and it'll be up to all of us to adopt them as we move forward with my evaluation.
So,
Can I just want to lead off here and just say,
sure.
to tie this to where I began the meeting, the first step in the superintendent review process is for the superintendent to conduct a self-assessment where they come up with goals. That's the first step. That's what Superintendent Paris has introduced tonight. We're going to get a training in December on sort of where the next step goes, which is our input on goals. And then in open meeting have discussion, or in via training session have discussion to narrow this down. And part of what DESE will also advise us on is, once we've got all of the goals set, how do we observe that and determine if the superintendent is meeting those goals? I just throw that out to frame this. Obviously, we have a lot of work to do on this coming forward, but I don't want to restrict discussion tonight. So questions or comments, Jess?
Yeah, I mean, my question is actually not so much about the process, it's just about the last point around absenteeism. I'm just wondering what the impact of the gas disaster is going to be on the level of school attendance or absenteeism in the South Lawrence schools. And I don't know what that's been so far, and you may have some data or some impressions to share with us, but I'm just concerned about measuring this year against last year, or using this year as a baseline for anything, given that we had that tremendous.
Yeah. It's why we're suggesting that the measure be from January till the end of the school year rather than from August or the entire school year. So we hope to have reestablished some sense of understanding of where our families are, and we are keeping track of those families who have been displaced and trying to work with DESE also on some guidance around students who have been missed some of our schools based on that, but earlier on, and we hope to reestablish good attendance patterns for the rest of our students. And as we had mentioned before and shared with you all, most of the students that have this pattern of absenteeism, there are many other root causes for that, so we'll also share some of that with you all. It's this might be one variable, but there's other root causes for that.
Yes, Superintendent, I just want to share that I had the opportunity to attend the last President's Council meeting where you brought up absenteeism, and that was the focus of the meeting. And I was impressed with the way you presented this to the parents and allowed the parents the opportunity to look for the root causes. What was significant, too, were the voices of the students that were present and their reasons, and looking towards the root causes of why absenteeism is an issue in our district. So I think, engaging the families that way, I think we're going to come up with some possible solutions and hopefully improve some, the rate of absenteeism in the district. But I want to thank you for that, because I think it was well done, very, very well done.
Thank you, Pat. We'll continue to do that work with multiple stakeholders to really understand some of the root causes.
Any other comments? Great. Thank you, Superintendent, for your work on that. And we know your team also has been doing so much relative to all of those goals. At this time, I would entertain a motion to adopt minutes from the September 12th meeting, executive session. Do I have a second for that?
Second.
All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye. All those opposed? With Board Member Anders abstaining from that vote, the motion passes. At this time, I would entertain a motion to adopt minutes from the September 12th regular meeting.
So moved.
I have a second. All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Motion passes. At this time, I would entertain a motion to adopt the minutes from the October 10th regular meeting. Do I have a second?
Second.
All those in favor? Mm-hmm.
It's not Sylvia Silverio, it's Julia Silverio.
I didn't even.
That's why we
You notice
get
what
this.
was going on? Thank
Could we amend those minutes to properly reflect Member Silverio's full name with that change made? I would entertain a motion to adopt the minutes. Do I have a motion?
Yes, so moved.
Do I have a second?
Second.
Thank you. All those in favor?
Aye.
All those opposed? The October 10th minutes with that change are
Sorry,
adopted.
I am abstaining because I wasn't here at that meeting. Just
And note that Board Member Rodriguez abstained from the vote on the October 10th regular
John, I need
meeting.
to abstain also.
And Board Member Mariano, but we still have a quorum on that vote. So the minutes are adopted. Are there any final comments? There being no final comments at this time, we will adjourn with our next
Mr. Chair?
meeting being almost. Yes, Mayor?
There are some final comments, dude, come on.
I just, this is not meant to be funny at all. I was just going to give a brief update on the gas emergency.
Please.
Yes, please, thank you.
Brief, just so that folks know, we're into this 2 months, and the work in the street was completed about a couple weeks ago, and that allows gas to be into people's homes. That was done actually under the expected time frame, with no security issues and no accidents. The hardest part now is getting the gas from the outside of the meter inside the house into the rest of the appliances. As of today, they have relit gas and hot water in the homes of half of the residential meters. And that means for Lawrence that there's probably 2,700 meters that are not yet lit, which is about 54% that hasn't been lit. And so in Lawrence specifically, it's half of all residential meters, so I'm just talking about in Lawrence. We boiled it down to there's probably about 1,800 homes that are in jeopardy because they're not either in alternative housing and they haven't been lit. And so we're working with everyone at the time right now to make sure that those people are safe, get all the things they need to be safe coming through the next snow that's going on. I do think they're going to hit the date of the 16th, if not sooner, because they are hitting a pace of almost 200, 250 houses a day being made house ready, and that means that they can be lit quickly. But for the most part, our families are being lit as fast as possible without really causing any danger to folks. We do have people in alternative housing, about 51 families in apartments, 1,390 people in families in hotels, and 347 families in the RVs. For that means for the school system, there's 81 kids in apartments, 1,600 kids in hotels, and 672 kids in the RVs. The good news is there's plenty of housing in case folks who need the housing, they should reach out to Columbia Gas and get that emergency housing now before it becomes something everybody wants to get the last minute. And just in case you don't know that number, it's 800-590-5571, and just press the option 3, and that'll get you into housing. For the most part, I think we've talked with the state wherever there's been a rub around expectations from the state and the stuff that we can get done because of the gas emergencies. Waivers have been put in place, and whatever goals we were supposed to meet have been kind of waived because they know the crisis happening. And part of that is having conversation with Secretary Pizer and the Board of DESE and the Commissioner about these goals and the MCAS and stuff like that. That's the short of it. And we post this stuff on the website every day, so if you're interested in finding out how people are doing or where people are still without gas, you can just go to the City of Lawrence website, and there's more information there. Thanks.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mayor, and we appreciate all of your leadership through this incredibly difficult time for the city, and all that you're doing and that your team continue to do. With that said, we are adjourned until December 12th.